Good morning. My name is Jeff Bowen, and I'm the Director of Library Programming and Public Affairs. On behalf of Pepperdine Libraries, I'm so thrilled to welcome you to the Surfboard Room. Payson Library is the academic hub of Seaver College, and we are so honored to partner with the International Studies and Languages Division on today's event. Before we get into today's program, I want to share a couple of upcoming events here in the Surfboard Room. I'll make it quick because I know we're a little behind. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., we join the Social Sciences Division on presenting a lecture by John J. Pitney on the history of presidential rematches leading up to this one, the 2024 election. Dr. Pitney is a professor of politics at Claremont McKenna College. Then on Wednesday, April 10th at 10 a.m., in partnership with the Humanities and Teacher Education Division, we invite you to a presentation by Assistant Professor of English Jonathan Koch. He'll be discussing the 3-volume complete collection of the historical, political, and miscellaneous works of John Milton from 1698, which is one of the rare books in special collections. You can learn more about these and other events on our website, library.pepperdine.edu. And now I'll pass it over to today's host, who will introduce today's featured guests, Amanda Riscala, Assistant Professor of International Studies here at Pepperdine University.
Thank you all for coming today. The canyons tried to thwart us, but we made it anyway. So thanks for waiting for us. Ann Kerr is a native of Southern California, has spent decades living, studying, and teaching in the Middle East. She was educated at Occidental College, the American University of Beirut, and the American University of Cairo, and taught at the latter 2 institutions for a number of years. She is currently at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she coordinates the Fulbright Visiting Scholar Enrichment Program for all of Southern California. Ann is an emerita member of the Board of Trustees of the American University of Beirut, the American University of Kuwait, the President's Advisory Council of Earth University in Costa Rica, and a current member of the Advisory Board of the Rand Center for Middle East Public Policy and the Council on Foreign Relations. She helped to form the Leadership Council for Churches for Middle East Peace, a Washington-based group representing mainline churches which support a balanced view of the Arab-Israeli conflict and how to attain peace in that conflict. She is the author of 2 books on the region, Come With Me from Lebanon, which kind of recaps some of the story we're going to hear today, and Painting the Middle East, which is a collection of her beautiful watercolor works. Her late husband, Malcolm Kerr, was the president of the American University of Beirut and was assassinated in office in 1984. She is the mother of 4 adult children, grandmother of 8, and great-grandmother of 2, soon to be 3. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for being with us, Ann. It's really like an honor for me and a really big full circle moment. My first question for you is if you could.
Just before.
Oh yeah.
Before we. Is this on? Try talk. Yeah. Okay. I just. Practically it's a joyful day and occasion because Amanda and I have known each other for so long. At UCLA, I met her when she was the head of the Arab Students Club, and I spotted her as such a terrific person and asked her to be the student assistant in our Fulbright office. And so she was, and she stayed through her BA and through her MA and PhD. And furthermore, we became such good friends, and I got to know Chris, and in fact, they had their wedding in my garden, and then their little children are my adopted grandchildren, although I don't see them enough. But anyway, that's the complete story. And so it's very, very special to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ann. It's an honor to host you here. Okay, my first question is going to take us way back. Can you take us back to your time as a college student, much like the students in our audience, in Los Angeles? How and why did you decide to study abroad? And can you tell us a bit about that experience and the impact it had on you?
I went to Occidental College, which is very much like Pepperdine, small liberal arts, Presbyterian founded. I don't know if this is true here, but anyway, a historic connection to the church, and very, very well steeped in the liberal arts. It was just a wonderful 2 years, and then it seemed rather I wanted to spread my wings a little bit and have more adventure. And so I applied to the program sponsored by the Presbyterian Church, actually, to study abroad. And it was a wonderful, wonderfully organized program with different options around the world. And it was, I think, I look back now and I think of the mid-20th century. It was 1954 when I went to Beirut for my junior year. But I look back on that as a time of internationalism and opening up to the rest of the world, as opposed, unfortunately, to what we see today. But that I was lucky to live then in my prime, and chose to go to the American University of Beirut because I really wanted to go to India. But my parents said, better go to Europe where we know more about it. And the minister of our Presbyterian church in Santa Monica said, well, he had been to the American University of Beirut, and it was very much like Occidental College, way, way older though, 1866, founded by the missionaries who had gone out to start schools, and they needed a university for their graduates. And AUB became the outstanding institution in the Middle East. And I just, a little moment in the present, I just come from a board meeting in New York, and the university is thriving miraculously. I mean, it's, you know, they're bombing the south of Lebanon, and yet somehow students love to be at AUB. It's kind of like this, actually. It's so beautiful, and looking down on the ocean from bluffs over the Mediterranean. So that's AUB, and what it was like when I got there. Great. I took a Dutch freighter with 6 other junior year abroad students and some teachers who were going out to teach at these mission schools. And it was 17 days. Our only stop was in Casablanca. And for the first time, I heard the Arabic language, and it was so guttural and strange sounding. And we were aboard for a whole day, and I heard the call to prayer. And it was so mystical and so haunting. And I guess I've felt that way ever since about the call to prayer. There's something about the Middle East that just made me want to keep going there and feel close to it in some ways, not in other ways. But I wanted people to understand it better, and it just seemed to me that it has never been very well understood in this country, particularly, well, it's coming to a head in a sense with the conflict between Israel and Gaza. But let's see, the classes were great. I got a job teaching in an Armenian school where they wanted a native speaker of English. And that in itself was another education, to become familiar with this whole Armenian story. And the children there heard stories from their grandparents of the atrocities against the Armenians in Turkey. And later I found out that my parents-in-law to be were actually had worked in Turkey with the Armenian Relief, which became the Near East Relief. And they set up orphanages along the Lebanese coast to care for these orphans from the Armenian genocide. That's an aside, but it was a great experience added to my AUB courses friends. One of the main things was living with 4 Arab women in one large room, maybe a third the size of this, and one was from Syria. Sorry, one was from Iraq. She was from Mosul, Iraq, and was there on a scholarship and learning English. So she wasn't quite in regular classes yet. She was in an orientation program. Two were Palestinians, and they had to flee from Haifa in 1948 with the first Arab-Israeli war. And their stories have remained with me forever, and I've interviewed them over the years to learn more about these the stories when they had to flee. Now, so mixed up with misinformation and legend. The last roommate was from Lebanon, and she was a Shiite Muslim. The two Palestinians, one was a Baha'i, and one was a Greek Orthodox. And the Iraqi was a Syrian Orthodox Christian. So this is a typical mix of different religions in the Middle East that go back to the time of Christ, in the case of the Christians, and to the Prophet Muhammad in the case of Muslims. And then they splintered and splintered and splintered, and as happens, hence so many conflicts over the years. So let's see.
So, Ann, your dorm room was a microcosm of the region. Sorry? Your dorm room was a microcosm of the region.
Exactly.
And Ann's being too modest, she actually undertook this really cool oral history project, kind of following all her roommates' lives well into their 70s. Yeah. And some have become refugees, others have become immigrants to other parts of the world, some have stayed in the region, but they all have these kind of stories that kind of mirror, right? Like the developments in the region, and that kind of capture them in personal form. And so Ann really wanted to capture that, and it's a very, cool project that we worked on together sometimes.
There's work to be done on that.
Yes, we should finish it.
Well, I guess now I can tell you the really major part is that I was first of all, the Dean of Women invited us down to her house to tell us to mind our P's and Q's in the dating world, and that American women were thought of as a bit freer than Arab women, and so we should just, as I said, mind our P's and Q's. Well, I thought I was a good judge of character, and I didn't worry too much about that. And I had some nice dates with other students from AUB. And one night I was downtown with one of them in the Regina bar. And Beirut has always had great nightclubs and restaurants, and now we just bars. But they used to be called nightclubs. Anyway, I was with a Greek, Lebanese or something, and across the room was this man, two men in these Ivy League jackets. You may not be familiar with this, but they're blue cord seersucker. I'm sure this is all unfamiliar, but anyway, they caught my eye, and they were kind of blurry. But lo and behold, I met one of them again when we had a tea dance at our dorm. Now, tea dance is, I'm sure, also an unfamiliar term, and it was probably unfamiliar back at Occidental too. But anyway, so the Dean of Women, who became later my mother-in-law, I've given this away, came to our tea dance to bring her son, who was wearing that cord jacket, that Ivy League blue striped seersucker jacket. And so, lo and behold, he cut in on me at the tea dance. And I thought, aha. But he couldn't dance very well. And But still, there was a definite interest on both sides. And then the next thing I knew, we were in the same Ottoman history class. And I had barely heard of the Ottomans. I hope you all learn about the Ottomans because it's a very important period in history.
We will in the Middle East class next fall.
You will. Okay, good. Yeah, really important as a background of what's going on today in the Middle East. Anyway, I didn't know a thing, but this man knew everything, and so it turned out we were doing our homework together, and one thing led to another, and it didn't take very long, and we got to go out on dates, even though my roommates weren't in that really. They didn't date. They stayed home in a dorm and read True Love magazines. Well, I went out with my future husband, whose mother was the dean of women. Anyway, that's how it happened. Moving right along, I think I covered that one.
Yeah. No, I mean, so you studied abroad, and then you found your husband. It's great. Yeah, so that is kind of the life-changing move to marry Malcolm. So I'm going to fast forward quite a few years. You and Malcolm get married, and in the end, you'll have 4 children. But I'm going to stop in the 1960s or so for just a couple minutes before we move forward. These are the years when Malcolm gets a PhD in political science, becomes an expert in Middle Eastern politics. He ends up teaching at UCLA for decades. His academic work starts to get more attention, sometimes good attention, sometimes controversial attention. Can you tell us really briefly, what was Malcolm's kind of life work about, and how did it shape your life as a family and your travels and kind of your experiences and how the rest of your life kind of plays out? Like, so it affected you in big ways too.
For sure. I have to say, to preface this though, that Malcolm was such a family man, and he didn't bring his work home with him, which is, you can debate. I always wanted him to talk more about his work, but we were very busy with raising 4 kids, as you can imagine. First of all, he grew up hearing Arabic and learned a bit of it, but when he went to college, he really studied it very hard and was very proficient. So that gave him a huge advantage in the Middle East, and when he could speak to people in Arabic. His writing was actually, well, his PhD thesis topic with this esteemed Middle East specialist at Harvard, where we spent our first 2 years of marriage while he wrote his thesis on Islamic reform. Now, it's a really important subject, but if you picked up the book, you might not understand what he's saying because it's pretty erudite or very academic. But the topic of reform is really important in Islam, as it is in Christianity, as we're seeing too. If people follow just a literal interpretation of a holy book, they might get stuck in it. And Malcolm chose 2 reformers from the early 1900s. I lived with them in my first 2 years of marriage. Muhammad Abdu and Rashid Ridda, for those of you who are the scholars over there. And we joked about them, but I never really got the inside information. I wish he had talked more, but instead we went to the movies, or he helped me grade my students' papers because I was teaching junior high school. Anyway, I'd say that he was very, very open and honest. He would, to himself, he was very true to himself in his beliefs, and he would criticize Arabs and Israelis equally. and he had many, many criticisms. I want to differentiate, because I learned this from a rabbi, differentiate between Jews and Israelis. And it's really important. So now I'm catching myself on it all the time. Anyway, this rabbi thought it was very important and emphasized that. But I'm saying that Malcolm was critical of Israel, and he was critical of Arab countries. And their attempts to try and get along were a constant problem that has only grown and grown. And you young people are seeing this terrible manifestation of it now in what's going on between Gaza and Israel. And it's hard to even imagine or think about. It's so tragic, and it's just gotten worse and worse. Let me say that at AUB, when we were there, the American University of Beirut, in the 50s, I arrived there only 6 days after the establishment of Israel in 1948. And Arab nationalism was thriving. There were demonstrations on the campus. Pan-Arabism was in the air. Women did not cover their hair in those days. You might be surprised at that. It was the idea of progressive Islam and progressive culture. Let's say Islamic culture was definitely more influenced by the Western world. And what has happened since over all these years has become less open to interpretation. And I doubt that anyone ever read Malcolm's book, Islamic Reform, which has to be tended to at some point in Islam. Anyway, I'd say his next book, his most famous book, The Arab Cold War, was main point was the Arabs' problems sometimes stem from their own inability to get along with each other, rather than from imperial powers imposing their own influence. Okay, take over.
No, I do think that sometimes when you think about Malcolm's work in Middle East studies or in Middle Eastern politics, he was one of these brutally honest people, and I think that he was misunderstood by people on both sides who wanted him to become like a mouthpiece for them, and his kind of like refusal to do that and to just pursue the truth as an academic. And I think that was pretty remarkable, because the United States in the 1960s was just like a very, kind of unquestioningly pro-Israeli kind of political climate. And in the region, it was like unquestioningly pro-Palestinian and pro-Arab, and it was the heyday of Arab nationalism. And for Malcolm to kind of have this ability to navigate both worlds and to just speak truth to everybody, like no matter the consequences, it's just kind of a remarkable kind of, I think, piece of his legacy. So I don't know, that's how I think about his work. So you, as a family, Malcolm does field work in the region, and you travel together in the region. I think it's really amazing to take 4 kids and just like gallivant across the Middle East. How do you do that? Like, I'm very much in admiration of that. But let's fast forward to the 1980s. Malcolm is a well-known scholar, a senior scholar by this point, and he has his roots at AUB. He grew up on the campus, and he gets this offer in the early 1980s to become president of the American University of Beirut, his kind of home and the place where he grew up, and a place that means a lot to him. Can you tell us a little bit about your decision as a family to take the offer and to move to a really hot war zone? Beirut in 1982. If maybe some of you know some of the history, maybe some of you don't. We're on the heels of the Israeli invasion of Beirut. It's a very volatile time. Anti-Americanism, especially kind of after the invasion, is rampant among Lebanese armed groups and political factions. So this is not an easy decision to take, I imagine. So could you tell us a little bit about the decision, but then more also about what it was like to lead a university, try to keep its doors open, try to preserve it as a space for free thought and as a liberal arts college in the midst of a war? I can't imagine that that was easy all the time.
Gosh. Well, the decision. I guess, again, as I mentioned on arrival in Morocco, in Casablanca, hearing the call to prayer was a sort of magical thing that was my romantic connection to the Middle East, or first impression. But for Malcolm, he was born there. His parents had worked in the Middle East. He loved the university, and I equally. It was the most natural next step for him in his career. He was in his just turning 50, I think, and when a professor has been grading papers for that long, he might be willing to go into administration, right? So the pieces all fit, except for the war. The right man, the right place, the wrong time, as it turned out. As far as our kids were concerned, that was a bit of a problem. Two were in college, or one was already in, one was going. Two were at home finishing junior high and high school. So I decided to stay home with them the first year and kind of commute. We didn't do it as easily in those days, but we did make a couple of trips back and forth that year. Then I don't know where to pop in here, but 82, Malcolm got there, and he had to sail from Cyprus. The airport was closed in Lebanon. He had to take whatever boat he could get. He bought a plastic air mattress, camping air mattress, because he knew this was going to be the case. So he got to Cyprus and somehow maneuvered to get a little boat. I think he did have a cot to sleep on, didn't have to use the plastic air mattress. But he sailed to, are any of you familiar with Lebanon? Lebanese heritage? No. Okay, he sailed to a town north of Beirut, landed, and went to the home of friends, AUB friends, and was not really meant to be going into the city, the war zone, because the Israelis had recently expanded their so-called 25-mile security zone between from the border up toward Beirut. They'd expanded it all the way to Beirut, and were actually occupying the city. I don't know. I think the shells were coming from Lebanese side. I don't remember bombs. It's not like now, but it was not pleasant. So he went on over to Beirut. He couldn't resist going to AUB. Got there. A few hardy souls were there, not willing to leave the university and insisting on staying to help him. And that was the first year that he was there. And there were some legends that happened. It was great. There were. I'll tell you two stories. One is nice and one is not so nice. The Israelis had their tanks, and they parked one right outside the campus. And the Israeli general or leader said, I want to go in to see your campus. So Malcolm came out and met him, and he, the Israeli generals implored him to go to the campus. And he said, "I'm sorry, you can't come on my campus, on our campus." And the Israeli general said, "Well, I went to Harvard and I want to come into your campus." And Malcolm said, "Well, I went to Harvard too, and you can't come into the campus." And that's now a nice story that goes around it still, I think, among students. And the other story is really very, very sad. And it applies to what's going on now. So some of the professors at AUB were Palestinians origin, and their houses had been occupied by Israelis. And they would call the campus security to report misdeeds. And they were really horrible misdeeds by the soldiers who would come into these houses, which is exactly what's going on now on both sides. The Israeli soldiers who were the occupiers came in and did very, very sickening misdeeds, such as defecating on the top of a refrigerator. And Malcolm, the soldier, was there, and Malcolm said to him, how can you do things like this? You're an educated young man. He said, and the soldier said to Malcolm, "This is what war does to us."
How did Malcolm handle, like, I'm sure a lot of armed groups or in different sides in the war wanted to use the campus to recruit, like, young talent. I mean, I think that's probably like an irresistible temptation for, all the different sides. So how did they handle that? Was there an attempt to enter the campus and to kind of politicize it, or did Malcolm kind of resist that? Like, I'm sure that was really difficult.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know about recruiting per se, but that was probably part of it. Each club on the campus was a different political group. So, the theater club were the Maronites. Amanda knows the names of the different sectarian groups. There were 17 different militia groups in Lebanon during the Civil War. So that represents most of the major different groups. And then they continued as different sectarian groups. But I don't know, the environmental club with something else. And
so that was the cover. That was the cover for
exactly.
Different
and
political groups. That's really interesting.
And we were always worried about the people who worked on the campus, where they came from, and people were accusing that person, of that cook, as being a Shiite spy, yes. So that was the case. And do you want me to talk about Hezbollah? Okay. Well, I don't know if you've heard of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, and Yasser Arafat, who was head of the PLO. At the end of you'll have to help me with the dates maybe. So the Civil War went from 75 to 90. And the PLO, in some Kissinger shuttle diplomacy, the PLO headquarters were moved to Tunis. And so that sort of depleted the PLO, leaving something of a political vacuum, at which time Hezbollah, formed from the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, or influenced by them, was becoming better equipped in Lebanon. And they were still a sort of shadowy telephone organization, maybe in the early 80s. And we did not know that. And had we known about them, we would have probably made a different decision about going to the presidency of AUB. But imagine 1982, and this is 2024. So all these years, Hezbollah has been a growing force in Lebanon. That's 82.
So I mean, hindsight, we know kind of Hezbollah became, I would say, the preeminent or the dominant force in Lebanese politics. But in 1982, it was unknown. It was just starting to get off the ground. Hezbollah was ideologically and financially and politically completely kind of tied to the new regime in Iran. In 1979, that's when the Islamic revolution happens in Iran. And so this is all happening in a really short space of time. So 1979 is the revolution in Iran. 1982 is kind of the beginnings of setting down these kind of roots inside the Lebanese civil war and the growing of this group called Hezbollah. So what happens in 1984, if you wouldn't mind telling us, Anne, and just maybe tell us what 1984, how it started, and kind of the impact on your family. Keep in mind at this point, Malcolm is the second most visible and prominent American in Lebanon after the ambassador. So he's a highly visible personality, which is also part of his vulnerability.
Yes, well, that Iranian revolution was a real turning point. And I also just want to mention, and I'm sure you talk about this, the increasing conservatism in Islam. And I was teaching at the American University in Cairo in 1979 was the first time I'd ever seen a veiled woman. Not a veil, but just the head covering come onto campus. And it was such a shock, especially because AUC and AUB were both full of pretty trendy young women who dressed nicely and maybe, were over chic or something. But at any rate, I think 1979 and the Iranian Revolution is a good date if we want to have one date, which is impossible, but the increasing conservatism of Islam. And Hezbollah was part of that, a sort of function of that, because as you know, their practices of treatment toward women, et cetera, are not what existed in the past. And I just want to emphasize that when I was at AUB as a student, it was like here, right now. I mean, makes people lovely atmosphere, open inquiry, people learning. But going to 84, conservative Islam was setting in. And so the idea of Hezbollah, which, as I said, had its roots in Iran, people were open to this more conservatism. Anyway, and the PLO had left. The hopes for Arab nationalism had died. Pan-Arabism, was no longer front and center. So Hezbollah came in. In Lebanon, there were just these 17 different sectarian groups were at each other all the time. We thought AUB could bring everyone together because the children of all these militia groups came to AUB. And so we had high hopes that we could take the university out of the war period, Civil War period. Let's see how to present this, because Malcolm was actually assassinated by members of Hezbollah in January of 1984. so that was very early in 1984. But I had been with him after this year of staying home with two of my sons. My youngest son and I went together to join Malcolm on the campus. We lived on the campus during these raids from shooting back and forth between the militia groups. This was a civil war going on. Hezbollah, a weak country like Lebanon, without a very well-functioning government, and so many different sectarian groups, was ripe for intrusion. And Hezbollah's idea was to get rid of as many Americans as they could. And there's one kidnapping of the acting president of AUB just before we arrived. And we learned later, he was actually a childhood friend of Malcolm's, had grown up. His father was president of AUB. And we learned later that he had been kept in various basements around Beirut, and then eventually was taken to Iran. And the U.S. government was able to get him out. But anyway, these events that led up to Malcolm's death were somehow, I don't know quite how to make you believe this, but we were so dedicated to this university and its place as hope for the future in the Middle East, and it amazingly still is throughout this last, ever since we left. It has gone through ups and downs, and today it is thriving, even though you might not believe it. Anyway, I don't know what else I can tell you about it. Do you have something you want to add?
No, just so after Malcolm's assassination, you have this like ramping up of the violence. In a lot of ways, his assassination is this kind of it's representative of this larger trend of moving away from kind of secular and leftist and nationalist ways of organizing opposition politics in the region to organizing it according to kind of fundamentalist Islamic political principles. And Malcolm's assassination, to me, is one of those moments among a few that represents kind of that turn. And that same year, we have the Marine barracks bombing, which is one of the greatest kind of losses of life in one moment of American service personnel, and this kind of represents kind of the retreat of the United States out of this part of the region for a while, at least. But I would like to ask you kind of, maybe this is a more personal question, but I can't even imagine how a family kind of makes sense of this, of, you go to a place and you take risks so that you can be a peacemaker, and instead you kind of pay the ultimate price for that. It would be really easy after that to become angry or cynical or bitter, or to kind of totally retreat from any engagement with the Arab world, with international education, with Arabs in general. But instead, your family does kind of the opposite. So can you tell us a little bit about how you responded to this tragedy and kind of where you found the strength to respond in the way that you did?
That's a nice question. We were 5, my 4 children and me, and I'd say that's when you really find out people's basic instincts and personalities. And I think each one in our family reacted differently and approached it differently. And mine was just to double up and work twice as hard. I'd been teaching at AUB and loved it. And I truly loved the Middle East. I can't tell you why. It's just one of these things. Even after the books I wrote, my oldest child, my one daughter, well, what can I say? She'd just been married, and it was really, they went through some hard years they were in China at the time for her husband's research, and it was very hard to have this happen to her. And I'm so amazed and proud of them because this is so many years later, and in your young lives, it's almost impossible to comprehend. But 40 years later, they have 3 great kids. They themselves are. My daughter went into politics in England because she felt she had to be involved. Living there, she had to become a citizen and live there. My next, and then I have 3 boys, and the oldest one is a professor of agricultural economics at Michigan State University, as is his wife, and I think he found his niche that way. And the next one, I think you know about, the athlete, the basketball player. His name is Steve Kerr, and he found his way playing basketball. And the team, and he was sort of adopted by Tucson, University of Arizona, after Malcolm's death, and the team all wore black armbands and were just embracing Steve and helping him. That was good. And then my youngest child was with me. He was only 15 and finishing high school. We moved to Cairo, where we had lived and where I had taught before at the American University in Cairo. And we had several sabbaticals there and loved it. And I had a whole circle of friends who would understand why we were in the Middle East. And somehow I just couldn't come home because we had set out to be those years in the Middle East, and I wanted to continue. So it was a wonderful place. AUC is a great school, as is AUB. And if any of you are interested in going to the Middle East for a junior or post graduate, I highly recommend. AUC is okay now. AUB, you might have to wait a little while, but students are loving it still at AUB, and we have no organized junior abroad programs in either place because of government advisories, travel advisories. But you can go independently. I'll be going in June for the graduation of AUB and board meetings. Yeah. So anyway, my last child. Well, I guess I should tell you about the trial.
If you need to head out for class, feel free, but I'm gonna do 2 more questions before we kind of wrap up. Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Nice to see you. It was very interesting, actually. Following Malcolm's assassination, there continued kidnappings, and we always didn't understand why Malcolm had not been kidnapped instead of assassinated. But pick your poison. The people who were kidnapped had really a rough 3 or 4 or 5 years. But when some of them got out, they went to lobby in Congress for the ability to sue for state-sponsored terrorism, another country for state-sponsored terrorism. So that's what happened, and this was 15, 17 years later. And so after this first round of trials, we were informed about it by one of the people whom we knew. And so he said, "Do you want to do this?" He said, "There's money involved." And I don't know, it was the Dean of Agriculture from AUB who'd been kidnapped. Malcolm had hired him. But I thought, oh no, this is would be difficult, too difficult. But then I thought, well, maybe I should get the information. He offered to send me the testimonies. And so I said, well, just send them to me, and that's all. And so, of course, when I got them, I thought, oh, I have to send these to my children. And so I did, and that was Pandora's box. Different ones reacted, particularly my youngest son, who had been there with me. And he really wanted some form of accountability. Not that this was going to be any hard and fast proof. But anyway, we would have these conference calls in the first days of conference calls, I think. This was in 2003. And so we eventually, my one son didn't want to do it because he was fed up with the American government. The basketball son just wanted to play basketball. And and my daughter and I were kind of trying to, as women's role, keep the peace, get everybody on the same page. And since my youngest son really wanted to do this, we all agreed. And so we had this trial, and my daughter, we wanted to have some different testimonies from the ones that had been given for kidnapped victims, because we thought assassination was different from kidnapping. Maybe it was not the same people as were proven to be the case in the first generation of trials, which was Hezbollah. So anyway, my daughter started doing fast research on on Hezbollah, actually, and went to these specialists who were researching what was going on, how Hezbollah had formed. Anyway, long story short, we had the trial, and my youngest son wanted to give. Oh, I know. I said, well, what order shall we go in? Shall we make it oldest? No, should we make it alphabetical? And Andrew, his name is Andrew, would have been first, and he was the one for whom we really wanted to do this. And he said, "No way! I've always been the last one in this family, and I'm not going to stop now." He wanted to give the last testimony because he wanted to impact the trial. And so it did turn out to be very successful for him. He was only 15 when it happened, and it's a terrible age. Any age is a terrible age to lose your parent, but he had wasn't able to speak about it all those years, and so now he could speak about it, and he gave his testimony, and he was sure his was the best.
So this was like a civil suit against the government of Iran, right? And you end up winning the trial. It's kind of a class action suit. It's not just Malcolm, but other families as well. But one of the kind of amazing things your family has chosen to do with some of the award money is to establish a scholarship at UCLA for Arab students coming from the Middle East to do their PhDs in one of the social sciences at UCLA. And I think that's an incredible kind of another full circle moment to kind of think about how you could extend Malcolm's legacy, through this trial that your family had like mixed feelings about and all that came out of it. So that scholarship still exists today. Okay, my last question for you, Ann, is, this is a hard one, maybe, I don't know, a big one. The world today often looks like a scary place. And things in the Middle East, and particularly in the Levant, like in Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Syria, look particularly bleak. And when we think of the U.S. role in the Middle East, it's easy to become cynical after the last few decades of, I think most people agree, pretty disastrous military engagements. Some okay ones, but mostly not so great. But I think sometimes people forget, even Americans forget, that Americans have a long legacy of cultural, educational, humanitarian, and diplomatic engagement with the region. Do you still have hope that the US, or at least individual Americans, can play a productive role in the region? Is engagement kind of worth it? Is it worthwhile? What would be kind of your, I don't know, final thoughts for a generation of students who are, many of them are in international studies, interested in engagement with the rest of the world, particularly parts of the world that where engagement can be difficult? I know, I'm sorry, that's really big.
No. I was just thinking, well, as a microcosm of the bigger world, having just come from this board meeting of the American University of Beirut, and the board has 35, 40 people, and the president, don't quote, no, what do you call it? For your ears only, anyway. The president is one of the most energetic, visionary people I've ever seen. But and so he's leading us into all sorts of things, a new campus in Cyprus. But my point is not that. What he's done is great, and the university is thriving, as I said. But thinking of all the people around that boardroom, each one has such a different personality and a different quality that they give to this wonderful university that everybody loves. I mean, I don't know what you could compare that to. Peace. I mean, you all want to get to peace. And they all have such different personalities, and sometimes there are personality conflicts. And
I'm sure they have different politics, too, inside Lebanon.
Exactly, different everything. But somehow, because this university is such a remarkable place, with it's aspirational, as we use that word now a lot, never fulfilling completely the goals, but the idea of it really embodies what we think of as the old American values, or whatever you want to call them, Western values, or that too sounds politically wrong, but good values, core values, and of bringing people together. And it's such a good thing to work for. Well, the world in a wider place is too. I mean, this beautiful world we live in, as you witness every day. And we've got to save it. We've got to make it work. And I don't want to say the wrong thing politically, but I'm just, if the election comes out the right way in the fall, I mean, we will have gone through something horrendously difficult, and this could be monumental. Not truly, but it could. It's a turning point, maybe. Yeah. So go for it. And I'm so impressed with my grandchildren who are getting married and having babies and moving ahead in good work in the world.
Thank you so much, Anne, for giving us this time. Yeah.